Oh, is it okay to sit down? I'm not lazy. Sure. All right. That's not my slide, so I don't know how this works. So while we're figuring out how to get the slide, there it is. Thank you all for coming out. It's good to see so many people I know and friendly faces and meet some new crew for sure. Oklahoma City's a small city, right? And so everybody knows everybody, and so it's always good to hang out with old friends and new. And who knows? Before we know it, we'll probably be working together someplace. That's just the way it usually goes. And so I think probably half the people in here have worked with it at one point or another at some spot. So I'm going to start talking. Probably shouldn't clap. I'm going to talk about how to build a great product team. I think we'll just kind of jump in. And I used a lot of memes because they're funny. So I think whenever we're starting out talking about building a product team and what we're doing whenever we're trying to put a team together, and those of you who do know me know that I enjoy a good quote from time to time, and people will give me a hard time, so I'm only going to use one quote today. But it's a Yogi Berra quote, and it's a very Yogi Berra way to say what I'm talking about, and that's if you don't know where you're going to end up someplace else. And I always have liked that kind of mentality, and so, or that thought process. So when we're starting to put together a team, closer to the microphone. It's my microphone. So I can take it off. Would that be easier? Okay. How about that? Oh, fuck, that's loud. Okay. So when we're putting together a team, it's an enormous waste of time, energy, and effort to build that team if you don't know what you're building them for, right? So you have to understand the why before you understand or start even thinking about the who. So in order to fill the needs, you have to understand the specific problem. It's unfortunately probably most of us have to deal with budgets. It's awesome if you don't, but budget oftentimes can control who you can and can't bring on your team. Are you a team that's continually delivering core features? And that's a very different team than an innovation team like what I'm running now at Tailwind. It's just a different type of a person. Bug squashing teams, business as usual teams, whatever you want to call that team that deals with all the suck work that teams have to deal with is a very different team than a team that's doing greenfield work. It's just you're looking at different problems and can be solved best by different teams. And so it's impossible to build the right product with the wrong team. It just won't work. And so I like to think products reflect the teams that build them. So everybody knows somebody who's built something. Just ask them. It's my neighbor's granddaughter can build you an app, or you should check out my niece's Shopify store, or whatever it is, and it's unbelievably frustrating. I know we have some clever crew here that probably deal with that more than most of us, because it's really, really a bad mindset. I think one of the ones that I hear almost more than anything is we can just outsource that, right, or offshore it. And I always ask, I was like, what do you know about offshore, right? Like, have you ever worked with a team in India that has a totally different culture and mindset than we do here? And it's not to say that you can't be very, very successful working with a team from India, but it's a very different. Working with a team from the Eastern Europe is very different than working with a team here in the United States. Even just as simple as dealing with different time zones can be ridiculously complicated. And so I think oftentimes people like to commoditize software development, right? Commoditize building a product. But the truth is we're not trying to figure out what orange juice to stock in the grocery section, right? We're building products and making multi-million-dollar decisions that are going to have ramifications for years and years to come. And I think whenever an organization starts to believe that people are cogs, right, that they can just be moved in and out without really any downside, that's whenever that ticking clock starts on the organization. They're not going to be around a whole lot longer, because what you're going to do is you're going to disengage your existing employees. You're going to have a whole team of people who are starting to look for other places to go, and probably giving you a good solid half effort, if that. So the best organizations understand this, and they put a whole lot of effort in finding the right people. At Tailwind, we may put too much effort in finding the right people, but it's really good because we're very, very protective of our culture, and we're very protective of what we're trying to build. But that level of care is critical to start to try to build those right teams. And so there are a few. The teams look different, right? Whether it's a greenfield team or a maintenance team, right? They look different, but I think there's a few things you can always look for that the best teams have. One of those is diversity. Diversity on a team is incredibly important, whether that's diversity of background, diversity of skill sets, just even different personalities. It gives you better coverage in the way that you're thinking. So I am for those of you guys who don't know, I'm white. Grew up very middle class, and I'm a male. So that is straight male. So that is the lens through which I see things. And as much as I try to be with other cultures and hang out with other people, that is still a very different lens that I think through product than other people who are on my team. And so if we can understand that, bring people with different perspectives onto our teams, we have a much wider vision of coverage when we're thinking about product. So whenever I'm building something through my lens, there can be some healthy tension with somebody who's presenting it from their lens. More lenses, the better, right? So that's not to say don't hire people that look like me, but have a diversity of people on your team. And you want people that want to be on the team, right? So I find those kind of fall typically in two camps. You have the people who are really good at what they do. Those are great people for your team, right? Because they're probably good at what they do because they care about it, they've practiced it, they want to be doing that. And then the other group that's really good to have on your team are the people that want to be really good, right? The ones that want to learn. And so if you have a really good mix of those two types on your team, you're off to a really good foundation. Because it's really, I like the memes. But the team has to believe in the product. It's impossible to build the right product if the team doesn't believe in it. It's not going to work. You may not be able to build the right product with the wrong team, but you can absolutely build the wrong product with the right team. If they don't believe in what they're building, if they don't believe in who they're building it for, they're going to, like I said, give that half effort at best. Teams may disagree on tools and methodologies. I know internally right now we have a sub war going on what wireframing tool we use internally. There's a good solid 4 different arguments going on right now. But all great teams share one thing in common, and that's they can get really behind a really solid vision, right? A really solid direction that a team is going. And an inspired team will get behind that vision and they'll start working towards success. So to get there, communication. Communicating the big picture, understanding the strategy, rationale behind the decisions that's guiding their work. Every team, every person on the team needs to understand the why, right? The why is ridiculously critical. And I think one thing that I've found interesting, and maybe it's almost paradoxical, because I think oftentimes we think of somebody who's more experienced, more seasoned. Maybe they can fill in the gaps for them. But I've found that the more experienced somebody is, the more somebody cares, the more they're going to actually care about the why, and the more they're going to get frustrated if they're not being communicated to. Because they're investing an enormous amount. They want to know how what they do directly relates to the effectiveness of what they're building. If they're in an organization, they want to know what they're building is how that affects the bottom line, the profit of the organization. they're working for. And those of you who know me well, know I have a bend maybe towards optimism, maybe to an extreme. I kind of usually think that it doesn't really matter. Like, we'll figure out how to thread the needle, even if we have to go like around 4 or 5 corners. But the problem with that is I probably, this is almost becoming a counseling session at this point. I probably have trouble with pragmatism, right, at times. And so I think the things that I've learned over even the last couple of years, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been building software with teams for almost 20 years now, right about 20 years. And I think the thing that I've screwed up on the most is not communicating risk and not communicating the challenges that we're coming up against, because by not communicating that risk and not letting people know what problems may come up, you're taking a large amount of knowledge and brain power and smarts out of helping you solve that problem when it comes up. So I think by not communicating that risk, your project actually becomes a little riskier, because when those roadblocks come up, when those problems arise, you don't have the brain power of your team who's been trying to think through this problem for a long time, whether that's knowing somebody who can come in at the last minute, a team, contract crew, whatever that can help you get it over the line, knowing a tool that maybe you can use that's going to kind of get that product where it needs to be. It's kind of, you're not allowing your team to engage in an innovative mentality by not including them on the full picture, and that includes risk. That includes some of the downside. So, and I don't think it's impossible to give them too much information. I think to keep a great team great, the vision, the key performance metrics, those KPIs, have to be reinforced frequently. It's critical for product teams to develop. There has to be that constant flow of ideas, that constant flow of updates. Everything done with an eye towards meaningful collaboration, meaningful interaction. I think, and I really do believe this, I believe the more open an organization is with the team, the more likely the team is to be actually solving the right problems. Without understanding justifications in the direction, without understanding what planning led to the current strategy, a team can't build a great product. They're just not going to be able to unless they understand that full breadth. And it's your role to communicate that vision. Right? It's your job. I think most people, not most, half the people in this room are product people, right? Whether that's product owner, product manager, CTO, whatever, VP of engineering, oftentimes that's going to fall on you as your role to communicate the vision. The team needs to know what's coming. The team needs to know why it's coming. Right? There's nothing more frustrating than something dropping on your plate that you don't have any idea where it is or where it's going. And over time, you start to build really good relationships, right? Like, I think relationship building is critically important. During the week, most of us spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our friends and our family. That's just the nature of what work is, right? And so you can build really great product and have a really great time doing it. There's no reason that those have to be kind of mutually exclusive. If you care about the people you work with and what you're doing, everything becomes more natural, which is really cool, because people that like each other tend to work together, tend to stay around together longer, get a little more cohesion. Cohesion, chemistry leads to a quicker shorthand. You're able to build products quicker. You're able to communicate. You know what gaps you need to fill. You know what problems that are particularly suited for different people on your team. And over time, you'll end up building better product faster the more you're able to keep that chemistry and that cohesion together. So what should that team look like? So this is my page turn slide. So whether we call them a product owner, product manager, product leader, whatever we call the product person, internally, it's your responsibility as that product person to bring the vision, the design, the branding, the customer feedback all together, right? You're the straw that stirs the drink, the glue that holds everything together. I'm sure there's some other cliche that we can throw in there, but that's your job. It's your responsibility to ask the hard questions, and ultimately it's your responsibility to make those hard decisions, right? So the execution of the product ultimately lies with the product lead, whatever that role is in your organization. And something I've seen over time, and this is where the hold my beer thing comes from, is I think not having a good product person, or not having somebody who's responsible for product, like whatever that role says, but it's very clearly defined that this is our product person, and just thinking, we can figure it out, is like the corporate equivalent of hold my beer. It's reckless, and it's almost certainly going to end poorly. It's a really bad way to go about building things. So, sorry, I should have turned that on. Designer. I know some people roll their eyes at designers. I probably roll my eyes at designers a lot. Designers can be difficult to work with from time to time. But designers are critical, right? So it's underestimated a lot of times. Again, I think this goes back to my kid can design something, but it's not about the look on the paper. One of my best people that I ever worked with, and I think he stole this, so it's not his to say, so I'm not going to credit him. But he said, "You're not paying me for the design that's in front of you. You're paying me for the 28 that I threw away." That thought process that went into how our users are going to engage with this, how our users are going to build this out. And so I think if you think of a designer as building an interface, it's a commodity, right? You're not thinking about it right. But I think if you think about a designer as the conduit between your product and how users think and feel about using your product, you're starting to think about designers in a right way. The best designers, they know like the users cold. Like they know what the users need, they know what the users want, they have a really good idea of how they're going to interact. They're experts at not just UI, but also the UX piece. Great designers elevate great engineering, and that's hard for me to say because I very much come from an engineering bend, but the very best product that I've ever worked on have had really great engineers, but they've also had really great designers, and together it's made the product a whole lot better than if we would have just had a really great engineering team. I always say, and sometimes people argue with me, but I always say, if you have a really, really awesome engine, but the car looks like junk, people are going to assume it doesn't run and probably never even give it a chance. So designers are critical. And oftentimes I think it's the difference between loving your product or not even giving your product a chance. I think a designer fills that role. There's a better place to save a few bucks than cheaping out on a designer. There just is, as hard as they can be to work with. So, engineers. I think today most people assume speed, performance. Those are kind of givens, right? Quality. People don't necessarily think that, well, that's awesome, it's really fast, or it's really performant. Those are given, but the problem is it's not necessarily given. Like, engineers are not necessarily the same. And nothing can derail your product quicker than really, really bad engineers, or at least average engineers even sometimes. I don't think anybody will ever say out loud, at least not to a group like this, or in a public forum, that we don't necessarily need engineers. I never really hear that. But I do hear in smaller private conversation that engineers are engineers, or I've heard verbatim, I wish these code camps would get better and we could put out a whole lot more people and they could just take over all the engineers, we could fix the engineering problem. That frustrates me to no end, because that's not at all understanding what engineers do, right? That doesn't understand what engineers bring, and nothing against code camps or anything like that. Code camps are great. Like I'm a big fan of OK Coders and that kind of a thing, but the problem is not with the code camps, it's with that mindset, right? With that mindset of just an engineer is an engineer. Building a product is not just about finding engineers that has heard of your tech stack, right? It's building a great project. It's dependent on finding the right engineers who can solve for the problems you're trying to solve. Right? That's critical. There's a study. It's an older study now, but it's still a really well-respected and well-cited study by Sackman, Erickson, and Grant. And they did a study on productivity, specifically around engineering. And what they found is the difference between a really great engineer, so we're talking a high-level engineer, top 10% type of an engineer, and a poor engineer, is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10x in terms of productivity and quality. They did, the way they study quality, not to get too deep into the study, was around like bugs and bug working over the next several years. But I say that to say, if you're going back and forth between an engineer and what engineer to bring onto your team, it's really short-sighted to say, well, they're not worth that extra 10% or they're not worth that extra 20%, because they're going to give you 3x, 4x, 10x over what a base, what maybe a less experienced or less talented engineer would be. So, and I say all that to say everything I said is probably wrong. So I run teams totally different today than I did 5 years ago. And I really hope that I learn and I get better, and I'm better at running this, and my teams 5 years from now look different than the teams that I run today. That's just the nature of what we do. But I think the important thing is we get out there and we actually put a system in place, because there's nothing worse than just kind of haphazardly running it and thinking, well, if we had a system in place, it would run better. If we put these people in place, this system in place, we could do this or that. The truth is, and I'm not a waterfall guy at all, but there are a lot of really big, great organizations that run very successful waterfall organizations. There's a lot of really great, successful organizations that run really pure Scrum. There's a lot of really great, successful organizations that run really good Lean. The trick is finding a methodology that you can learn from, jump into, and start iterating on it. So the first team you put together is probably not going to be great. The second team, hopefully, will be a little better. And then over time, you'll iterate. The trick is just focusing on getting the right people on board, connecting them to that vision, and then just continuing that communication. Eventually, you'll find the structure that works the best for you. So. Any questions?
Ooh, there's another mic. Double mics. Cool. My question is, if you could, so this was awesome, like great high-level overview, but if you had to boil down to like one piece of advice, Back to the Future style, you can go back to like young Greg and give him some sage advice as he's starting his first product team. What's like the one thing you do, like a mistake to avoid, a thing to focus on, anything like that?
That's a good question. I wish I'd seeded that question so I could have thought about it more. I'm still young Greg. To be clear, right? I do turn 40 this year, so I'm not young for much longer. But I think I'm still there. The one thing I think that I think the biggest mistakes I made. So I was a VP of engineering for a long time, ran a pretty good sized team, about 30 people, 30 engineers, total team closer to about 50. And I thought I could do product for the whole thing. I thought I could run product across the board. Whether that was arrogance, cocky, or just product really didn't exist a lot 12, 15 years ago in terms of an individual role. It's still, we had a project manager, and a project manager played a little bit of that role. We had a couple of BAs, and they'd play that role. But I think having a product person on a team is critical. And I would even if a designer is not full-time, having a design resource that understands your product, even on a quarter-time, half-time basis. I think oftentimes, at least me, and again, I come from more of an engineering bend, but I'd be like, I just need to hire a whole bunch of really smart engineers and we can figure it out. And not rounding out the team was probably the biggest mistakes that I made early on.
Got a question on Twitch. How do you encourage diversity of opinions and still get stuff done?
People are watching on Twitch. So that's a good question. Again, I wish I could have thought about that probably a little more. I think there's a lot of value in having a meeting up front, like before you really kick off, whether that's you're running a sprint, whether that or a 2-week sprint. We actually at Tailwind run 6-week, what we call super cycles. I'm very used to coming from more of a lean, feature-based approach to where those are not fixed times, but we're about to kick off a specific feature. I think there's a time and a place, whether that's a half a day or a day, to try to get as much feedback as you can, and then distill that feedback down into a plan, and then run, and then everybody feeling like they've had a chance to have their voice heard. Now, not to be said, again, we all want to be agile. We all want to be as productive as possible. So it's not to be said that we don't learn as we go. But I think ideally, if people feel like they've had a chance to have their voice heard, if they feel like they've had a chance to put their 2 cents in, they're not going to be chiming in near as much throughout the process, throughout the project term. So I think having that good upfront conversation, making sure everybody has a chance to get their voices heard, and then and then bring in feedback as you need to go. But I think discouraging to an extent, not in a bad way, but like bring that to the retrospective, bring that to the next kickoff meeting. That's an awesome idea, that's an awesome concept, but we got to get this knocked out. We've agreed to this feature or this set of features for this time frame.
I don't want to be loud. Okay, so what are your thoughts, or I don't know, maybe if there's a kind of a streamlined answer, but your opinion around trying to handle death by meeting and this over communication concept? Because I've been in environments where I've seen both. So there's this concept of, hey, we have to tell each other everything, and then we spend too much time in meetings, especially with more remote teams, or wasting time and not allowing the engineers and or the product to have the autonomy to get anything done.
Yeah, so I am not at all a Dilbert fan. I actually despise Dilbert in a lot of ways because I think work should be a really cool place to work. That being said, one of my favorite cartoons is a Dilbert, and it says, meetings will continue until we figure out why work is not getting done. And so I think death by meetings is a really big thing. It's gotta almost come down, and depends on how the structures are, but whether it has to come from the CEO down, or if you're on a larger team, maybe the product owner can handle that, or a larger organization. Maybe it's got to be at a VP level, but there has to be, it's a cultural thing more than anything. One thing I love about Tailwind is we don't really have any internal email, which is awesome. We communicate via Slack, but we also have the ability to turn off our notifications, and I think you have to be really protective. We use, it's free if anybody wants to add it onto Slack. It's called Clockwise, and it will actually move your meetings around to make them more efficient and move them into blocks, and then where you have more like think time. Super cool. And then whenever you're in think time, you can actually schedule that to snooze notifications for that period of time. I'm a huge fan of communication. I think there's nothing more important than communication. But I think doing things like snoozing notifications, having at least chunks of your day. Cal Newport talks about deep work. And I think there's a ton of value to deep work and actually being able to get deep into problems. And you can't do that in 1 hour or 2 hour blocks. And I think it's got to be a culture across the board that everybody understands and agrees that, hey, we do at Tailwind, and I've been here a solid month, so obviously I know everything about Tailwind, but we do dungeon days. So on Wednesday, there are no meetings across the organization, and so the engineers go, and then some engineers will do multiple dungeon days, some squads, so that's kind of how we're structured, around a squad type concept with engineers and designers. And actually, we're a little bigger than the team I presented. I actually really love it. I just know that's not necessarily practical, where we're also bringing in a marketing resource as well to help the team out, and a customer success person. So I really love that. And so there are days where there are no meetings, and I think it's really critical, if you feel like you're getting over meetinged, to schedule a vacation day where you're on vacation but you're actually in the office. I think that's a really good tactic that a lot of people use really successfully. But I think it's got to come, and I know this isn't necessarily a fair answer, but I think it's got to come from, like, it's got to be understood across the organization, because all it takes is a C-level person, a VP or whatever, coming and dropping in and throwing that all out the window, right? And so if it's understood across the organization that Dungeon Day is a day where we don't have meetings, and everybody's on board with that, that can be successful. But, or, hey, if a person is blocked off time, then they're actually not here, they're not here. But I think that's the only way that you can really do it, is if you have an organization-wide understanding that meetings can kill productivity.
First of all, I just want to say thanks for sharing your experience with us. I'm curious about your thoughts on QA involvement in the overall product lifecycle. Yeah, and I know a lot of companies, especially startups, start out with continuous integration, continuous deployment. I'm interested in your manual versus automated testing thoughts.
I'm a big fan of automated testing. I actually probably have too strong of an opinion on QA that's not backed by fact or data. My opinion on QA is whenever engineers don't have any responsibility in QA, they build really shitty software. I don't know if that's okay to say on Twitch, but I think it's, my deal with QA is I like automated testing wherever possible. I believe that there should be some general standard of code coverage. I know that that's not necessarily always a popular opinion, but I think whenever people are checking in, there should be enough unit tests to cover the right tests. If unit tests fail, it should kick it back. And not to say I don't believe in UAT. I think UAT is critical. But I think if you have a culture of let's just build this product and then we'll ship it to the customer, and if there's anything wrong with it, they'll get back to us, or our QA team will get back to us, you end up building really bad product. And oftentimes that's around organizations where speed is like critical. And so the engineers are cutting corners. But what they don't realize is it's creating an enormous backlog of work because all going to come back, right, in the end. But they can go to their manager or their supervisor. I would say it's a smell, right, an organizational smell. If you have a lot of work coming back from QA or a lot of work coming back from your customers. And so for me, I think you need to have as much automated testing as possible. I think unit testing is critical. I personally fall on the side of the fence of engineers should test their own code and then should be very involved in the UAT with the customer, whether that's an internal or an external customer. But again, I know a lot of awesome organizations who have really great QA departments and they put out high quality software, but that's my bend.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about, I guess, your ideal hiring process for building out the best team? Yeah,
I love hiring. I really do. That's why we do things like this, right? To meet new people and hang out. To me, the ideal hiring process in an ideal situation is, I don't think there's a lot, I think you got to be a little careful meeting people in just this environment because you can end up with a very homogenous group, right? And so that's why I think it's really important that you look outside. You use, we have internal and external recruiters that we use at Tailwind. But I think, and maybe I'm not answering your question exactly, but in terms of the process, I think it should be relatively straightforward. You have an HR screen, right, where you make sure that what's the culture? Do they fit our culture? Are they going to be the right kind of a person for us? Then you have to do a technical screen, whether that's a designer or a salesperson or an engineer. There should be a technical screen, and that can all be done remote, right? And then I'm a big fan of Project Day, bringing them in. I probably prefer half day. We do a whole day Project Day at Tailwind, but bringing them in and getting people to actually work with the team they're going to work with, be on the squad that they're going to be on, and you can really see over the course of time how that goes. I think you got to be a little careful in that if you throw too many curveballs or too many negative things, because I think the trick is, and things that people don't understand oftentimes is that we're not picking people, they're picking us. And so I think that can be some of the complexity sometimes, especially if you're trying to throw too many curveballs or really get them or zing them or rake them over the coals a little bit. They can be like, screw you, I'll just go work somewhere else. But I really do like that idea of a project day to end it and get them in with the squad and with the team they're going to be working on and have some people who understand the space. The truth is, right or wrong, I kind of got thrown in very deep in at a relatively young age, so I've always had to work with people who are smarter than me. and new things that I didn't know. And so I've been very comfortable hiring people that I have no idea what they do. And I think that that's probably, there's some pros and cons to that, but the pro is I've always had to bring in somebody else who knew what they were doing to evaluate the skill set. But I think you can cover a lot of that in technical screen. And then that demo day or project day, whatever you want to call it, where you give them a project to run through with the team. I think you learn a lot, both culture and skill set on that day. To me, that's an ideal situation. It's hard to find people. I think everybody in here in the room knows how hard it is to find people. It's difficult to find any people, be it a product person, an engineer, a designer. There's just not a whole lot of people. We've been trying to hire a product person in Oklahoma City for a very long time, and it's a buyer's market, right? Buyer's market. Same with engineers. So it's hard to find them, but I think being methodical is important. I hate the phrase hire slow, fire fast. I think it's really ridiculous and inhumane. I'm a much more fan of hire slow, fire slow, because if it's on you and you made a mistake on hiring somebody, and you really, oftentimes they've left long-term jobs, they've left locations, families, friends, things like that, and I think it's on you to make sure that they're successful, but that puts a lot more importance on that hiring process, making sure you get the person right in the first place if you're not going to just throw them out the door whenever they don't fit. So, but that's how I would do it.
All right, we have time for one more question. Anybody else?
I was going to ask, so you talked a lot about like making a cohesive team surrounding like the vision of the company and making sure that, business initiatives are well communicated and that sort of thing. So my question is, when it comes to both developing and communicating and executing like product strategy, what does that ideally look like with the team? I mean, are you getting feedback from them and their kind of perspectives, or is it kind of top down? I mean, what's your ideal process look like?
No, I think product, again, and I talked about this when I was talking about the product leader role. I think product is ultimately responsible for making those final decisions and final calls. But I think we all do ourselves a disservice if we don't bring the whole team in throughout the process. Depending on different organizations have different teams, right? But designers may look at something different than you. One thing that I've seen over and over and over throughout my life is product coming in with something and an engineer implementing that thing, knowing they could have done something better, smoother, slicker, or faster, but they were just doing their job, which is an irritating phrase to me. So I think it's really, really important that product comes up with a core idea, a core concept, and then you hone those like KPIs together as a team, and you end up honing kind of that end product together and deliverables, and everybody agrees across the board. It's not fair to a designer, it's not fair to an engineer, any of those people to say, hey, this is what we're going to deliver this quarter, this sprint, this whatever, if they weren't involved in that decision-making process. It'll backfire on you. So I think it's critical that part of that product strategy involves the whole, in our case, squad, team, whatever you call it.
Last question on Twitch. It says, how do you determine culture fit?
So I'll probably get in trouble on this one because we're a very data-driven culture at Tailwind. But for me, it just feels right. And I don't know how to put a hand on it. I don't know how to put numbers behind. You meet somebody and you just know that she's going to be the right person, that she fits in with the culture, that she knows, she just gets what we're trying to do here. And maybe that's arrogant to think that I can do that. But I've been hiring people for a long time, and I've found that just from a culture fit, you understand the culture, you become part of the culture, and I think you can start to recognize that in other people. So, okay. Thank you all.